Hello everyone, welcome to a new video. So that's not how I start my videos at all. Hey everyone, it's Haley. It's been a while, sorry. So I have so many books to talk to you guys about today, like honestly, 2 stacks this big. I don't even know how many it is, but I wanted to kind of do like a little recent, not little, but a recent reads video talking about the things that I've been reading. Well, I kind of have been taking a little bit of an unintentional hiatus. So I've got my 2 giant stacks here of all the books that I have read since I last did a recent reads. I think that the book that I ended off on was Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. I'm not like 100% sure about that, but I'm pretty sure that that is the last book that I talked about in a recent reads video. So if not, I loved it. I talked about it quite a bit over Bookmas. I do have a few books here that I read like before Bookmas, so I definitely talked about them in Bookmas. I'm going to be kind of keeping it short and sweet for some of these. Some of them I'll go more into depth. It's just going to be a little bit of everything, keeping it casual. I'm trying to like not put so much pressure on myself to actually like make these videos a whole production, because I find that it's the most fun for me when it's not like that and I'm just kind of doing whatever. That's why like the setup for this is just not what it usually is, but you know, it's whatever. I'm happy. Now, before we get into it, I did want to say a big thank you to Harlequin Canada for sponsoring today's video in honor of the recent release of Never Never by Colleen Hoover and Taryn Fisher. I feel like my favorite thing that Colleen Hoover does is like the psychological thrillers. I find that they're so unique and different, and I just can really get into them. Like Verity completely blew my mind. So I'm really, really looking forward to Never Never. This is the story of like these best friends turned lovers, but they lose their memory. So then they have to kind of like work their way back to each other again. It seems like it's going to be a very high stakes situation and also like an absolute nightmare. Like I can't even imagine that, but I feel like if there's anyone who can tackle a subject matter like this, it's definitely going to be Colleen Hoover alongside Taryn Fisher. I think this is going to be fantastic and I really cannot wait to read it. So thank you so much once again to Harlequin for sponsoring today's video. You can check this book out. It is out now, so I will have a link down below for you guys. So before I get into this pile, I wanted to talk about the books that I either couldn't find my copy for whatever reason or I don't own anymore. So first is The Enigma Game by Elizabeth Wein. This is a book that I talked about during Bookmas, and it is a historical fiction that I did really enjoy. I love Elizabeth Wein's historical fictions, and they always are focusing on like pilots, and specifically mostly it's female pilots, and this was another good one. Like it was a solid one, not my favorite by her, but I did like it a lot. And then I also no longer have The Last Magician by Lisa Maxwell, because unfortunately I ended up DNFing this one. It just wasn't for me. It's one of those stories that I wanted to love it. Like I'm really disappointed that I didn't end up enjoying it, but I found myself just kind of pushing through because I was in love with the concept, but the actual execution just wasn't working for me, and I kind of finally had to accept that. It seemed so cool, and I still am like really, really sad about it, but this is a book that I've tried a few times now, and I just need to realize like it's just not for me. I unfortunately had like the second book in the series, and then I think there might be another one coming out this year actually, but oh well, what are you gonna do? So I think those are all the books that I don't own, so I guess let's just like grab things. I don't even know. I'm gonna start here. The Lady Rogue by Jen Bennett. I have had this on my TBR for so long. I have read almost all of Jen Bennett's books, except she had one that came out, I think it was in 2021, that I haven't gotten to yet, but the rest of them I have read, and at least her YAs, I mean, because I'm pretty sure she also writes adult romances. But this is a fantasy. It's a historical fantasy, and I did like this one. I don't think I enjoyed it quite as much as her contemporary novels, but it is like a treasure hunt sort of thing set in Romania, and you had a really interesting main character. I thought it was like definitely a departure from the usual for her, so that was interesting. I just don't think I like really fell in love with the story, but I think it's like a solid one. I would recommend it. I think it's worth the read. It just might not blow you away. I don't even know where to put the books that I've already talked about. I guess I'm just gonna pile them back here. It's gonna be a nightmare cleaning up after this video. Next is Blood Like Magic by Lascelle Sambury. I ended up reading this around Valentine's Day because I knew it was about a character who had to like kill her first love. So I was like, that seems kind of like Valentine's-esque, you know, like something that could work for around Valentine's Day, kind of a twist on that usual thing. It's a YA fantasy, and it deals with witches actually, which I don't think I was like exactly expecting. I didn't know that it was a witch story, so that was a nice like pleasant surprise. I thought that the witch storyline was really well done, and I enjoyed the characters a lot. I just found that like I kind of knew where the story was going very early on, and that's not typically something that happens for me. So that kind of like, it affected my enjoyment a little bit. It's not that I didn't like it, it's just I kind of knew where things were going. But overall, this was a really great read. I loved the author's writing. I have her next book, which I don't know if it's out yet, but I did have an arc of it. So I'm really looking forward to reading that one, although it's very different from this. This actually has a sequel, so I'm not sure yet if I'm going to read the sequel. I'll have to think about it, just because I'm not like a huge series person. We'll see, but I would recommend this book. I thought it was a very solid YA fantasy read. Next is When in Rome by Sarah Adams. So I actually have the cheat sheet here because I thought that I hadn't talked about it yet, but I'm pretty sure that I did actually, so I'm just gonna skip over that one. But it is just an adult romance, and the cheat sheet was friends to lovers, but I enjoyed this one actually a lot more. I didn't know what the tropes were really going into it, but it's kind of like a small town romance with a celebrity. You have a celebrity who ends up getting, like, she kind of runs away basically from everything and ends up in Rome, Kentucky, and she is just like staying with this down-to-earth guy, so it's kind of like a grumpy sunshine sort of thing. This was really sweet actually. I felt like it kind of hit different levels than I got in the other book, The Cheat Sheet, which led to me enjoying it just a little bit more. I thought it was very cute and a super easy read. Next is The Sweetest Remedy by Jane Iharo. This, I had read something by this author before. I read Ties That Tether earlier in the year, and I really fell in love with it. So then at the beginning of this year, I ended up picking up this one, and once again, it was a story that I really liked. I found that this one leaned more toward the side of being more like a chick lit, or I don't know like the correct term, like a lighter contemporary, like a lighter adult contemporary, but with like a deeper meaning. Does that make sense? I found that the romance kind of was in the background. It definitely wasn't my main focus. The main focus was this character who is meeting her family for the first time. She was kind of like a secret child that her dad had, and then her dad ends up dying, so she ends up going to Nigeria for the first time and meeting all of these siblings, like all of this massive family that she has. And it's kind of a story about like her being accepted, her struggles with that and everything. I thought it was really well done and a very impactful story. Next is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. I had heard such amazing things about this book, and after Jackson died, I was really looking for something that was like going to be mindless and kind of just let me escape. So this was recommended to me quite a bit, and I don't think I enjoyed this one as much as everyone else like has. I know that its whole thing is kind of, it's a low stakes high fantasy. That's the whole tagline thing, and it definitely is. I think I just was kind of like bored a little bit. It's about characters in like this high fantasy world, so you have different creatures that are opening up a coffee shop, and it's just about like coffee, this love of coffee. It is honestly super cute, but I just think I hadn't really read anything like this, and I don't know if it kind of meshed with me, if that makes any sense. I didn't not like it, I just didn't really like fall in love with it. I think my expectations were really high because so many people had loved it, and I think that the whole coffee thing was really adorable. Like, I can't deny that this was adorable. There was just something that didn't quite 100% click for me. Next, I quite recently ended up DNFing A Magic Steeped in Poison by Judy Eilen, which I'm really, really sad about, but this just wasn't working for me. I don't know if it was like the state of mind I was in, I really don't know, but for some reason I just like wasn't really gravitating towards this one, wasn't really wanting to pick it up, so I decided, okay, like it is time to kind of just like let this one go, give up the ghost there. So unfortunately, this didn't work for me. It's a YA fantasy, it deals with like tea and stuff. It seems so cool, so I hope that other people will like it, but for me, I just kind of felt okay about it. Next is X's and O's by Amy Lee. I had read Set on You by Amy Lee last year and I was quite let down by it, to be honest. So X's and O's I kind of went to with a little bit of lower expectations, but I ended up really loving this one. It's definitely like the perfect read for around Valentine's Day, but honestly, like whenever you're wanting to read it is totally fine as well. But it definitely has like Valentine's Day vibes. You are following a main character who is this hopeless romantic, and she also is actually like what's the word? She's not a booktuber, but like she's a book blogger, I guess, except she does kind of do videos too. I don't know, but basically she talks about books on the internet. So very relatable for me. Sometimes like reading parts of that, it felt a little bit cringe because it felt kind of corny, but it's kind of like to be expected with a story like this. But the romance was amazing. I loved the love interest, fell in love with him, and just had so much more success with this one than I had with her previous book, which was a very pleasant surprise. Next, I read Graceling by Kristen Kishore. This is like such a long time TBR veteran because this book has been out for ages and people love it. And I did really enjoy this one. I definitely get the appeal and I feel like I will probably continue with this series. I had a blast listening to the audiobook. I thought it was very engaging and it didn't read like an old style YA. It kind of did, but also I feel like the main character really stood out for me, so I liked it a lot. Next, we have Bunny by Mona Awad. So I didn't really like this book and I wasn't really liking it, but then while I was listening to this audiobook, I got the call that they were going to put my cat down. So it kind of is like forever tainted for me. But yeah, it's not something that I was like really enjoying anyway, so I kind of feel less bad about it. But it was really weird. I had heard amazing things and I think it just wasn't for me. And Bunny is like this creative writing class. It's kind of like the plastics, like you have these, they call themselves bunnies. I've been in a creative writing class, so I guess like that aspect I could understand, like that was kind of realistic, but I don't know. I don't want to say realistic because it's really not realistic, but whatever. Next is The Guncle by Stephen Rowley. I was so pleasantly surprised by how much I loved this book. It's definitely one you're going to hear me talking about much more in the future. It was adorable. It kind of, once again, is sort of that like chick lit thing. I don't know a better way to say that. I know like the genre by bookstores is called like women's fiction or chick lit, but if you have a different way for me to say that, please let me know. I feel like chick lit is quite exclusionary and I'm not trying to be, but anyways, not going to get into that now. But it is kind of like a lighter story, but romance definitely wasn't the focus. It was more of like a family story, and I thought that was just really lovely. I loved the fact that it was focusing on this character who was going through grief, like this grieving process, but also his niece and nephew are going through the same thing, and they end up having this like just super close relationship. This one totally like hit on all levels for me. Next is You Had Me at Ola by Alexis Daria. This one, to be honest, was kind of a little bit forgettable in my opinion. I felt like it was just okay. It's once again one where I feel like I had very high expectations because so many people have been like talking about this book and loving it, and I just thought it was like a fine romance. Once again, one that's kind of dealing with celebrities, but you have more like soap opera stars, like telenovela sort of thing. So it's like an on-screen, off-screen romance, and yeah, it was cute. It just like, it didn't stand out to me. With and Without You by Emily Wibberley and Austin Sigmund Broca. I have read almost, I think, all of their books by this point, and I've kind of had mixed feelings on them, to be honest. It's been kind of like flip-flop. And this one I feel like I definitely have mixed feelings on. It's long-distance romance, but the way that it begins kind of made it hard to end up like rooting for the couple at all. So I feel like it was a journey overall, and I'm still not sure how I ended up feeling about it, but I do think it was very, very interesting and different for like a YA contemporary romance. Arsenic and Adobo by Mia P. Manansala. I read this during Bookmas and I really loved it. I wasn't exactly expecting to, just because cozy mystery, like mystery in general, isn't always my vibe, but I did end up really liking it, so that was a nice pleasant surprise, and I'm glad that I did give it a chance because I never would have known. But I honestly think the reason I gave it a chance was, I mean, the cover's cute, but also there's a wiener dog on it, so like obviously I had to. But yeah, it was like, cozy mysteries are weird because there's murder, but then it's also like a sweet story at the same time. So that was interesting. I loved the food, loved the family, solid read. Next, I actually, in like the same time span, ended up reading The Lost Ticket by Freya Sampson and Last Chance Library by Freya Sampson. So I've talked about The Lost Ticket quite a bit because it was one of my favorite books of the year. Like I talked about it during Bookmas, so you guys know, loved this one. But then this is kind of the first book. I ended up picking this one up even before Legends and Lattes, actually, after Jackson died. And it was kind of funny because like one of the first characters you're introduced to is named Jackson, and I was like, oh, what are the chances? And then also like the little kind of like orange brown cat. I just thought it was ironic. But yeah, I did really enjoy this one. I think I enjoyed The Lost Ticket a little bit more, but maybe part of that is because of like what was going on in my life at the time that I read this one. But I thought it was very sweet. It did offer that like good escape where it was a good mix of things that made me feel, but like not too much, you know what I mean? So it's this group of like eclectic library patrons. They're trying to save this library, and the volunteer librarian, she's the main character, and it's this whole like movement to try and save the library. It's just a really good, like cozy, feel-good read. Next is Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. For once, I'm not like super late on a Taylor Jenkins Reid book. I feel like it usually has been ages since it's come out, and then I finally read it. But this one I actually read pretty close to when it released, and I ended up enjoying this one a lot. I didn't expect to get as into it as I did because I don't really like, I'm not really that into sports. I have known nothing about tennis, but I found the story to be very fascinating, and also probably very realistic, like seeing how this woman was trying to defend her title even though she's supposed to be like well past her prime. She's trying to have this whole comeback. You see how passionate she is. She was a really fascinating main character overall, and I'm glad that we got her story. Acts of Service by Lillian Fishman. I talked about this one during Bookmas, didn't care for it at all, so I'm not going to like touch on it too much more. I don't want to like beat a dead horse here. Oh my god, I was trying to find this book everywhere and it was right in front of me. I didn't realize I grabbed it already. No wonder I couldn't find it. The Enigma game that I was talking about earlier, what a struggle. I'm trying to like pick out the books that I've already talked about during Bookmas so then I can kind of focus on the last few here. Okay, this is just gonna make a mess of things. Heirs Apparently I talked about during Bookmas. This one I did enjoy. Didn't enjoy it quite as much as I had kind of hoped to, but I thought it was a really solid story. I had fun with it. And then This Time Tomorrow by Emma Straub was definitely a letdown for me, and I'm really sad about it because I thought it seemed like a very interesting concept, but it kind of felt incomplete, which was very disappointing. Also feel like I've talked about these two here. So The Bones of Rune by Sarah Raleigh, I ended up DNFing it. I think I DNF'd it. Did I DNF it? I can't actually remember now. I either DNF'd it or I just felt kind of okay about it. If I did DNF it, I got quite a ways through, but it wasn't what I was expecting, and I feel like that's like the main way that I can be disappointed is if a book just is not what I'm anticipating it to be at all. I just end up being let down, which is really sad, and that's exactly what happened here. It's set in Victorian London, and it's following an African tightrope walker, and I thought that seemed so cool. Like, she has this power where she can't die, and I was like, oh, interesting. But then there was this whole apocalypse thing that came into it, and it just kind of lost me after that. On the other hand, Iron Widow by Xiran J. Zhao, I have talked about quite a bit during Bookmas because I loved this one. Fell in love with it, and I'm so excited for the sequel coming out this year. Like, this totally blew me away. I completely understand why it is so hyped up. It's definitely not overhyped. Entirely worth the read. Also during Bookmas, I talked a little bit about Angel of Greenwood by Randy Pink. I thought this was a really, really great historical fiction and would highly recommend it. I love the fact that the author really established these characters like before this horrible tragedy, so then you got to know them, and it just was very heartbreaking, but really well done. Okay, we're almost there, kind of. I need to go through these like rapid fire, but if there are any of these you would like to hear more about, I will do a separate video about them. I definitely plan on doing a video about like specifically books that I've loved recently, so then I can kind of go more into depth on some of these, because yeah, I definitely have like bit off way more than I can chew. So next, Sing Me Forgotten by Jessica S. Olsen. I enjoyed this one. It's like a Phantom of the Opera retelling, a fantastical Phantom of the Opera sort of deal. So it was really interesting and unique, and it was a solid fantasy read. What the Night Sings by Vesper Stamper. I think I talked about this one like a little bit during Bookmas, but it is a World War II historical fiction, but it's like after the war, and you're following a character who's trying to like get back to life after this like horrible tragedy after they have been imprisoned during the Holocaust. So it's so hard to read, very chilling, but I felt like it was really well done. Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute by Talia Hibbert. I was so excited for this one because it's the first YA book by very well known and like beloved adult romance author Talia Hibbert, and I didn't enjoy this as much as her adult romances, but it was still like a really cute story. I just think I was expecting a little bit more from it. Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. I really enjoyed. It definitely was kind of a case where I feel like the hype made my expectations very high, and it's not that I was let down by it, but I don't think it like entirely lived up to those expectations. But it was a really sweet romance, but also had a lot of levels to it, and it's definitely one where I'm excited to, like, there's another book that's following another character from this like universe, and I'm really excited to pick up that book soon because I thought the writing was fantastic. Like I said, the cheat sheet we're going to skip on past. I'll move to this pile. All My Rage by Saba Tahir, I had heard nothing but amazing things about, and I totally understand why. This is like such a heartbreaking and difficult read, and I know it's one that's really close to the author's heart, and I felt like that came through in the story. It is about immigrants, and you are seeing like the then and the now and like these family generations. It honestly is a story that will tug on your heartstrings, but it is beautifully done. The Davenports by Crystal Marquis is kind of like Bridgerton, but in like Chicago, and it's following one of the only wealthy Black families in Chicago. It's set in like 1910 or something like that. Yes, 1910. And you're following so many different characters in here. So you got a really like well-faceted look at everything, and it was a ton of fun. I believe this is the start to a series. I'm hoping that it is, because I definitely will want to continue. The Book Eaters by Sunyi Dean, I quite enjoyed. It was super different than anything I've ever read before, but like in a really good way. I like enjoyed this one kind of as much as you can because it is a very unsettling read. The Starless Sea I ended up finally reading, and I think that Erin Morgenstern just isn't for me. This was okay. I just didn't really fall in love for whatever reason. I don't know why. I love her writing, but there's just something about these books. It doesn't quite work for me. On the other hand, The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna, I completely fell in love with. I loved this book so much. It was fantastic. There is something about Kristen Hanna. I cannot even put my finger on what it is, but oh my God, it makes me fall in love every single freaking time. It is so fantastic. And this book, like, I read The Nightingale. It's one of my favorite books of all time, and this one is definitely finding its way onto that list. Okay, The Do-Over by Lynn Painter. This one I kind of just felt okay about. Like, it is a Valentine's Day story. It's cute, but nothing really, I don't know. I felt like there was kind of something missing. It's a Groundhog Day, Valentine's Day situation, and it was just fine. Another Valentine's Day read, The No-Show by Beth O'Leary. This one was not what I was expecting, but in a really great way. I actually quite enjoyed this one. It wasn't really a Valentine's Day read per se. I thought it was going to be more romance, but it's not. But it's very unique. Wild Woman in the Blues by Denny S. Bryce. I quite enjoyed this one. It is set in jazz-age Chicago, but it's also set partially in like 2015 following this film student who is interviewing a former chorus girl, and it's a lot of fun. She's like 110 or something now, and you're getting this like total look at her life, which is very enjoyable. I'm So Not Over You by Cosco Jackson was very interesting because I've never really read a love story about exes, like a second chance romance between exes, and second chance romance is one of my favorite tropes, so it was cool to read it in a different context, and I feel like it definitely got me. It was really sweet. Never Ever Getting Back Together by Sophie Gonzalez is one that took me a little bit to get into, but then once I got into it, I was like, oh my God, this is so good. It's like characters who go on this dating show, and it's because they all have the same ex, but then two of the contestants fall in love with each other, and it was just adorable, like this super cute sapphic romance. Loved it. And finally is Echoes and Empires by Morgan Rhodes. I haven't read a Morgan Rhodes book in a while, but this was really cool because it was kind of like a different fantasy world where it was a technological sort of world, more kind of like modern day. And the storyline was really interesting as well, where like magic infects you. I thought it was very different than what I was expecting. Okay, so those are all of the books that I have read recently that I wanted to talk to you guys about very briefly. I'm sorry it was so rapid fire, but like I said, if you want to hear any more about any of these, I would be happy to do another video kind of like narrowing it down a little bit. But thank you guys so much for watching, and thank you so much to Harlequin for sponsoring today's video. Don't forget to check out Never Never by Colleen Hoover and Taryn Fisher, which is out now. So yeah, I will see you guys in another new video soon. Bye!